Welcome to the Dash Mindset Podcast. I'm Sherry Zievenbergen. You were born, you're gonna die, and your adventure is your dash in between. So make the most of it. Unlock your potential in all aspects of your dash by embracing your uniqueness and living in a way that's authentic to you, not by doing more things, but by focusing on the right things. I'm a former corporate leader turned coach who's on my own journey, and I'm passionate about helping you on your journey too. So on the podcast, we'll explore how to live authentically by deciphering who you truly are and what you truly want. Are you ready to take a step toward designing your dash? Someday doesn't actually exist, so let's do it now. Hey there, it's Sherry Z, and today I'm going to talk more about something I talk about a lot, strengths, and why it's so beneficial to identify and understand yours. And I'm going to share more about one particular category of strengths, relating strengths, also known as relationship building strengths. In episode 25, I provided a super high-level overview of the UMAP tool I use. It has 4 pillars, and strengths is one of the 4. Today, I'm going to dig a little bit deeper for a couple of reasons. For one, strengths is one of the primary keys to figuring ourselves out and figuring other people out too, which is very important because we spend our entire lives with ourselves. And most of life is spent with other people too. So understanding strengths helps immensely with all of that. Second, most people think they know their strengths and actually don't because we can't read the label when we're in the jar. Third, I'll be talking about relating strengths in particular today because this is the type of strength I hear most people say ugh about when they learn they have primarily relating strengths. And there's no reason to do that. So we'll dig into that a little bit deeper later in the episode. And the fourth reason I'm digging deeper into strengths today is because I realized I was referring to the strengths assessment as StrengthsFinder in episode 25, and it's now referred to as CliftonStrengths. So I was outdated. Keeping up on name changes is something I do not excel at. So CliftonStrengths, previously referred to as StrengthsFinder, is the strength assessment. And it was developed by Donald Clifton and the Gallup organization, all because Donald Clifton asked himself, what would happen if we studied what was right with people versus what was wrong with people? What a profound thought, right? So it's an assessment that's been taken by millions of people worldwide, and its purpose is to help people identify and understand their natural talents so they can live and work within their natural talents and be more productive and fulfilled. And what I really appreciate is that it allows us to identify how we operate from both a personal and professional standpoint, because how we operate in one area of life is generally how we operate in all areas of life. So when you take the assessment, you respond to over 170 statements, and based on your responses, you receive a top 5 report, which identifies your top 5 strengths out of 34 themes total. Also, see your 34 report if you desire, which ranks all 34 themes from your most dominant to your least dominant. So the 34 report basically provides a more nuanced view of your strengths. In a lot of cases, I recommend people obtain that one as well. However, given our tendencies to focus on weaknesses, because we're human, it's natural to jump to what our least dominant themes are. And sometimes we stay there. We decide what's wrong with us. We beat ourselves up. We decide to focus on those things. And when we focus on those things, the things we don't naturally do well, we tend to focus on improving those things. And we end up spending a lot of time and effort making incremental improvements, small gradual changes, which generally result in little growth because we're focusing on things we're not naturally talented in already. So rather than the exponential growth that's more likely if we focus on developing our natural talents even more, we're making incremental improvements instead. So I encourage people to think about that before reviewing their 34 report to ensure they'll use it in a way that will serve them. So something to consider. Okay, more background. CliftonStrengths consists of 34 strengths, all of which each of us has access to. It's simply that some of the 34 are more natural to us than others. So when I work with people, we generally focus on the top 5. Those are the 5 most natural to a person. It doesn't mean someone is incapable of demonstrating the other 29 strengths. It simply means their top 5 are most natural. So I like to think of the 34 strengths as a cupboard full of coffee mugs. If you're like me, you have at least 34 coffee mugs, right? Your tendency is likely to grab one of the mugs in the front right? You likely don't take out all the mugs and grab one from the back, but you can. You can grab one from the back if you need to. It just requires a bit more effort. And like strengths, the placement of your coffee mugs might shift based upon what's going on in your life, the phase you're in. So, for instance, if you're traveling a lot, you may have travel mugs in the front of your cupboard. And if you start traveling less, they may shift to the second row, maybe even the third. Similarly, your strengths may shift as well based upon your life experiences and the circumstances you're in at the time. Your top 10 to 15 will stay relatively stable throughout your life. They're likely to stay in the front of the cupboard, but they may shift a little bit. For instance, if you're in a team-focused role, you may be using more team-oriented strengths, such as harmony, for instance. And I'll talk a little bit more about what the heck harmony even means. Harmony may show up as one of your top 5 strengths. And if you later shift into a role that's less team-oriented, you may find harmony shifts out of your top 5 simply because you're using it less. It doesn't mean you're less harmonious. It's simply based on your focus. So when we think about strengths, we can think about them from the standpoint of any relationship at work or at home. It's particularly common to think about them in corporate environments for team building, leadership development, those kinds of things. But we can actually think about them from a professional or personal standpoint. So if we think about them from a professional standpoint, to have a well-rounded team, or actually to have a well-rounded relationship of any kind, it's important and beneficial to everyone to have diverse strengths within that team or within that relationship. So it's beneficial to know which strengths may conflict with others, some of the potential clashes between certain strengths, as well as some strategies for managing conflicts when they arise. Not if they arise, when they arise. Because sometimes we just know we're annoyed when someone does something differently than we do, right? So it's helpful to know why we're feeling annoyed, why there's conflict, and how we can resolve it. And misunderstandings is one of those things I talked a little bit about in episode 25 as well. So additionally, it's beneficial to understand how strengths can complement others, to know some examples of strengths that work well together, because that happens as well, and how to leverage complementary strengths in teams and in relationships. So to start with, it's necessary to understand your own strength combinations, and that helps you understand others as well. Now, we're going to focus on one of the 4 categories of strengths, one of the 4 domains of strengths, the relating category, also known as the relationship building category. In episode 25, I shared a high-level overview of the 4 categories or domains: relating, also known as relationship building, influencing, executing, and thinking, which is also known as strategic thinking. So now we're going to dig a little deeper into the relating strengths in particular. So as I said, some of the things I most often hear from people who have typically 3 or more relating strengths in their top 5 is, ugh, I'm such a softie. No wonder I don't get anything done. I'm focused on other people all the time. I'm focused on talking all the time. And that's simply not the case. Yes, people who have more relating strengths than others do have more of a tendency to connect with others, to spend more time with others, but that doesn't mean they're softies. It doesn't mean they don't get anything done, that they can't get anything done. Just like any of the other types of strengths, they're not worse than or better than any other strengths. They're just different. So let's dig into how specifically relating strengths are different. Okay, relationship building strengths explain how people build connections with others. They help individuals connect with others, build strong teams, create a positive collaborative environment, all of those things, all of which are very good. Some of the key characteristics of relating strengths include naturally focusing on interpersonal connections, having the ability to understand and relate to others, having a natural talent for creating cohesive teams and fostering a positive work environment. All good things. People with these strengths tend to build connections with people one-on-one. Those connections are just made very differently depending on which strengths the person has. So generally speaking, they're one-on-one. But again, just different. So all of these are good things. Whether you have relating strengths or not, thinking about them as good is very beneficial. So there are 9 relationship building strengths: adaptability, connectedness, developer, empathy, harmony, includer, individualization, positivity, and relator. And so we're going to dig a little deeper into each of these. Okay, so we'll start with adaptability. People who have the adaptability strength are easy to get along with. They're go with the flow. They like to go with the flow. They're flexible. These people are really considered go with the flow type people. They take things as they come. And some of the healthy descriptions of adaptability, the adaptability strength, are flexibility. People are comfortable when things change. And like I said, they go with the flow. Now, just like any other strength, there's also a shadow side to adaptability. Every strength has the positive as well as the shadow side. It depends to what extent we are using the strength. Okay. So some of the descriptors of the shadow side would be directionless. Sometimes people with this strength can feel as if they don't have any direction. They can feel indecisive. And sometimes that's the perspective other people who don't have adaptability have of people who do have adaptability. So that's the thing about the shadow side. It just determines to what level we're using the strength. Okay. So connectedness, we'll talk about connectedness a little bit. People who have the connectedness strength they have the belief that we're all connected, and they're really good at helping other people see what their purpose is. They believe there are few coincidences. They're the kind of people who say that wasn't just a coincidence, right? They generally have strong faith. They are able to see the purpose in other people, and they're able to help other people see their purpose. The shadow side would be that sometimes they're viewed as being too idealistic, maybe naive, maybe a little passive. And again, it just depends to what extent somebody's using that particular strength. Okay, developer, we'll jump to that one. Developers invest in people. They're just natural mentors. They're natural trainers. They are able to recognize the potential in other people and to really see the improvements people are making. They're good teachers, they're good coaches, and they enjoy helping other people succeed. Now, if somebody does not have this strength, it doesn't mean they are incapable of any of these things, just like any of the other strengths. It's just more natural for people who have the developer strength. And on the shadow side, they can be viewed as people who are wasting time, sometimes focusing too much on people who have lower potential. And they're just kind of, I'll say they're the people who tend to drag the dead bodies with them. They're just not going to give up. They are going to help make these people better, right? And sometimes, it's up to other people to make themselves better, right? So they can be viewed as maybe wasting time on people who aren't in it for themselves. Okay, empathy. People with the empathy strength, they just get people. They're able to put themselves in other people's shoes. It's just natural for them. They can pick up on people's emotions. They can see what people are feeling. They're the kind of people who, when they walk in a room, they're able to detect the mood of the room. They're able to detect when somebody's a little off, when something's not quite right. And so they just naturally create trust with people. They generally have a sense of what to do and what to say, especially when it comes to people's emotions. And they have the ability to just customize their approach to each person because they're able to detect the emotion of each person. Now, sometimes people who have empathy strengths are viewed as being overly involved, maybe too soft, because they do get so into other people's emotions and they just naturally detect them. Okay, harmony, that's one that I mentioned early on. And those are the people with that strength are the people who naturally identify common ground. They naturally find the common ground in groups. They negotiate well. They're great at asking questions. They facilitate well. And they're really down to earth and practical. They don't focus on the differences. They focus on, okay, what are the commonalities between people? And not that they're dismissing the differences. It's just they're able to naturally determine, okay, here is our common ground. Oftentimes, people with the harmony strength are viewed as maybe conflict avoiders. Maybe people look at them as not being confrontational enough. Maybe they deem those people as being indecisive. And again, Not always the case. It just depends to what extent somebody is using the harmony strength. Includer. Includers are the people who are including everyone. They want to include the people that other people generally ignore. They want to make sure everyone is involved. They believe that we're all important. We're all fundamentally the same. And so people with the includer strength are caring, they are engaging, they engage all people. One of the barriers, or one of the maybe unhealthy descriptors, or when people are taking it too far, is when people view them as being generous to a fault. Maybe they seem indecisive. And so an example of somebody who might have the includer strength, if you have a friend who maybe you plan to go to a movie with this friend, and you think, oh, this friend and I'll call my friend Julie. Julie and I are going to go to a movie. It's going to be great. It's going to be the two of us. And Julie shows up with 3 other people and says, oh, my neighbor didn't have anything going on tonight. And I also brought my cousin and my cousin's friend, Bob, right? That person is not necessarily not wanting to spend time alone with you. That person that probably has the includer strength, and they just are naturally compelled to include everybody. So that's an example of somebody who has the includer strength. Okay, individualization. People with the individualization strength, they really appreciate the differences in people. They are just naturally capable of recognizing individual strengths. It's not something they try to do, it's just natural for them. And they really appreciate the unique qualities of people. They can draw out people's strengths, they just naturally see them, and they really appreciate people's uniqueness. They know, hey, there's not a one size fits all approach for everybody. Now, people who maybe view that in a different way, maybe in a less positive way, might think, okay, this person cannot make any decisions when it comes to people. They're unable to see the commonalities in people. And they might view these people as being unfair because they might not necessarily be treating all people in the same way because they're really focused on their individual uniqueness. Okay, a couple more. Positivity. Someone who has a positivity strength is a natural encourager. They just see the best in people. And they're generally upbeat, enthusiastic, energetic, optimistic. Now, this might drive some people nuts, right? Some people might think, okay, if you're that optimistic, you're clearly naive. You just don't understand the world. They might think they're superficial or insincere. Sometimes they're viewed as the Pollyannas, like, okay, all right, Pollyanna, you're just naive. You just don't understand. No, not necessarily. These people are just naturally positive, and they're just naturally encouraging and see the best in people. Okay, last one, relator. Relators they really tend to connect with anyone easily. However, they generally value fewer relationships with a deeper connection. So they enjoy close friendships, and they're real, they're genuine. They're not the type of person who wants to have, a bazillion relationships. They are quite satisfied with a few close relationships. And so they're trusting. They're generous. They're really great friends because they really do not take friendships for granted. They don't take relationships for granted. They really focus on deepening their relationships. And some people may view people with that strength as maybe being a little cliquey. Maybe they play favorites. And that's not the case. It's just that they view relationships differently and they develop those relationships differently than other people. So that's a quick explanation of each of the relating strengths. And we've talked about how important it is to have diverse strengths within relationships and teams, how important it is to understand how they complement each other. What I really want to emphasize is that to start with, before we can understand how strengths complement one another in relationships and teams, it's important to understand how our own strengths complement each other. So I'll share some examples, and I'll just stick to the relating strengths and talk about how some of the the relating strengths complement one another. So if someone has both empathy and developer, both relating strengths, that person is going to naturally understand others' feelings, and they're going to be drawn to helping others grow. So the two work together. Another example would be if someone has both includer and positivity. Someone with both includer and positivity is really going to be focused on creating a welcoming environment, a positive, warm environment for all team members. They're going to include everybody, and they're going to be really positive about it. Another example might be if somebody has relator and individualization. The relators naturally form connections, and those with the individualization strength are really focusing on the uniqueness of people. So someone with both relator and individualization are going to form those deep connections with people by recognizing their unique qualities. So hopefully that makes sense. But the starting point is always understanding ourselves better before we can understand others better. So again, if you don't have relating strengths in your top 5, never fear. There are absolutely ways you can develop strengths in this area, just like any of the others. For instance, when it comes to relating strengths, you can practice active listening. It's not natural for some people, and that's okay. It's just something that can be practiced. Another thing would be engaging in team building activities. That's another way to really build on relating strengths if it's something that's less natural for you. Also, seeking opportunities to connect with diverse groups of people. We are generally drawn to people like ourselves. But again, diversity is what's really going to allow teams and relationships to grow when we complement one another's strengths. Now, some of the challenges, I've talked about the challenges with each of the relating strengths. Some of the potential challenges associated with relating strengths overall might be potentially prioritizing relationships over tasks or results. So someone with executing strengths, for instance, is going to think, oh my gosh, what is this relating person doing all the time? They're just talking up a storm all the time, and they're not, getting things done. Not the case. They're just doing it in their own way, right? Sometimes people with 3 or more relating strengths will struggle with giving negative feedback because they're so focused on the relationship itself. So it's important to understand that sometimes that feedback is actually going to help the person. It's just hard to see when you have a lot of relating strengths. And sometimes it's difficult for people with primarily relating strengths to make decisions that are going to negatively impact others because they're so focused on those relationships, right? So it's just something that's less natural for people to make those decisions if they are going to have negative impacts. Again, doesn't mean it's bad. It's just something to consider. So we all have strengths. Usually the hardest part of leveraging those strengths is to first realize we even have them. Then it's a matter of determining how we can leverage them, starting with ourselves, then thinking about other people. So some examples of how we can leverage relating strengths, let's talk about in the workplace in particular, would be through team building and conflict resolution, customer service, client relationships, mentoring, coaching, creating inclusive work environments. And so it doesn't mean that you have to have a particular title to recognize any of these things or to do any of these things. It doesn't mean you have to have relating strengths primarily. We're naturally doing some of these things anyway, which is the primary reason you might not recognize it as a strength, even if it is one for you. So recognizing and determining a way you can do these things even more, if relating strengths are strengths for you, is going to make your life that much more fulfilling. It's going to make your work that much more fulfilling. And it's going to benefit the people around you as well, especially the people who don't have these natural tendencies, because you're going to complement each other. So that was a little bit more into strengths overall, the strengths assessment, what it's called, how strengths can help you. And I dug deeper into the relating strengths in particular. So if you are one of those people who has primarily relating strengths, you have all kinds of strengths. It's just that you have primarily relating strengths. It does not mean you're a softie. It doesn't mean you're indecisive. You can also get things done. You can also think strategically. You have access to all of the strengths. It just means some things are more natural to you than others. So that is it for today. Next time, I'm going to talk, maybe not the episode right after this, but I will be talking more about the other 3 categories of strengths, which are influencing, executing, and strategic thinking, because they all have their pros and cons, right? Just like anything else. So we'll dig deeper into that another time. And I hope this was helpful for you, especially if you have relating strengths and you have a tendency to consider them to be a bad thing. And especially if you don't have relating strengths and you think it's a bad thing when other people do. So thanks so much for joining me today. I will see you next time. Have a great couple weeks. Thanks so much for listening to the Dash Mindset Podcast. If you enjoyed this podcast, please subscribe on your favorite podcast player, tell your friends, and leave us a review. Follow me on my social media platforms highlighted in the show notes, and get in touch with me at thedashmindset.com. Share the topics you'd like me to explore in future episodes. Thanks again for listening to the Dash Mindset Podcast. We'll see you next time. Design and differentiate your Dash your way and make today amazing.